You're Warlock. I've crossed 12 galaxies to find you. 1,000 worlds. 1 billion people seek your aid. Help us. Today on the Comic Book Report, the Adam Warlock Omnibus from Marvel Comics. Stick around and check it out. Greetings all, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today we're throwing it back all the way to the Bronze Age for the Adam Warlock Omnibus. This was a really fun collection of mostly 70s comics that frankly I'm looking forward to talking about today. But before we dive in, if you're interested in getting your own copy or other collected editions, I encourage you to check out our channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. You can use my code, TheComicBookReport, at checkout to receive $2 off of your order. Please note if you do use my affiliate link or code to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's a fantastic way to support our channel at no additional cost to you. Thank you for considering, now on with the show. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were predominantly written by Stan Lee, Roy Thomas, and Jim Starlin, and illustrated primarily by Jack Kirby, Gil Kane, and Jim Starlin. The issues in this volume were published by Marvel Comics across the 1970s, but there are some Silver Age issues in this collection beginning as early as 1967. The volume itself collects the Fantastic Four, issues 66 and 67, the Mighty Thor, issues 165 and 166, Marvel Premiere, issues 1 and 2, Warlock, issues 1 through 15, Strange Tales, issues 178 through 181, The Incredible Hulk, issues 176 through 178, and the annual, issue 6. Marvel Team Up, issue 55. The Avengers Annual number 7. And Marvel 2-in-1, issues 61 through 63, and annual issue 2. And finally, this oversized hardcover collection comes in at 904 pages. At this time, I'd like to issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first look at that Adam Warlock Omnibus from Marvel Comics. Again, it's an oversized hardcover collection with glossy print paper stock and a sewn binding, which I'll show you in a moment. I will say that this cover is the direct market or DM variant cover. I will throw up a quick look at the standard edition cover as well. Please note that the spine little picture window will also be a little bit different for the standard edition versus the direct market you have here. Although I think we have a little inside peek at the standard edition picture window on the Under the Dust Jacket art print, which I will show you momentarily. But first, here's a look at that back cover. We have the nice thumbnailing of all the issues included in this omnibus, which I always love to see. We usually always see these on our Silver Age and Bronze omnibuses from Marvel Comics, and some other random ones thrown in as well. I think that this is a great feature. I really enjoy seeing all the thumbnailed cover artwork like this. Very fun, and I think especially with a title like this that does jump all over the place, it's cool to see all the different titles. Very cool stuff, a standard kind of Bronze Age omnibus. As you can see, I'm giving you another quick look at that dust jacket along with the interior flaps, things like that, and then we'll transition to the Under the Dust Jacket artwork on the collection. It isn't anything too remarkable. We're not getting a wraparound art print or anything like that. It's much more straightforward, like a lot of these recent printings of Silver and Bronze Age omnibuses. We have the kind of Warlock title across the front of the hardback volume itself, and on the back we have a little image of the Soul Gem, very cool, and you will also see the spine. Like I mentioned, it has a reprint of the spine information with the standard edition picture window, so you can take a look at that. You'll see all of that momentarily. Boom, there you go. Like I said, really straightforward cover art and design, but I like it. I really prefer this direct market cover as well. Very stylish, showcasing that Starlin era. And now that that's out of the way, we're going to go ahead and do a quick look at the sewn binding for this omnibus. Really enjoy this. I think in the Bronze Age, we're not into the really experimental panel layouts as much, so there is some white space, so very little gutter loss in my opinion at least, but you can take a look as I flip through the book as well, but I think they did a great job on the binding. And now we can transition into the book itself. As we start making our way in, we have the standard front matter, your title pages, publication information. We got a nice list of creators followed by a table of contents. Love to see it. We also have an essay and or introduction at the front before we dive into the issues themselves. Really like to see that as well. It's a great way to get context on the book and what we're about to read. And of course, we dive right in. And like I mentioned earlier, there is kind of a hodgepodge collection as far as what it collects, but it has all of the early appearances of Warlock in chronological order, which is a great way to get into this character. As far as what this collects as well, I will say it starts with about 2 issues of the Fantastic Four from Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, which has the first appearances of Adam Warlock, who at the time was just known as him. After that, we have 2 issues of The Mighty Thor, which is also written by Stan Lee and illustrated by Jack Kirby. And after that, we transition into the Marvel Premiere stuff, which is really his first kind of solo venture before we jump into the actual Warlock issues. We go for a while with the Warlock run before having some, I think, Hulk issues, and then we go ahead and transition over into the Jim Starlin era of Warlock. It's a really interesting setup for this character because I feel like even within this one omnibus, we have like 3 iterations or fresh starts of this character, and they all feel very distinct, at least in my opinion. Those early Silver Age issues with Fantastic Four and Thor really have this character that's not really defined yet. Literally, he just goes by him, and he doesn't have a ton of the features that we'll eventually associate with Warlock. We see more of that as the character evolves under Roy Thomas, who takes the reins after Stan Lee with the kind of solo Warlock stuff. That era by Roy Thomas and some others really sets up Warlock as kind of a Jesus or Christ figure. We basically have the High Evolutionary, which is this kind of Marvel villain most of the time, I believe. He basically constructs his own Earth, which is going to be known as Counter-Earth, on the far side of the sun, presumably out of sight of the Earth. He makes this Earth basically trying to be a replica of the Earth we all know, but without the presence of evil. However, he falls asleep and evil enters the world. And before he goes to destroy it, Warlock comes in and basically says, "Send me to the world and I can rid it of evil and save it and save those people." So he's thrown into Counter-Earth and he's trying to seek out the Man-Beast, who is this kind of wolf evolved humanoid wolf figure who kind of is the essence of evil and introduced evil into Counter-Earth. Him and all his minions are sort of wreaking havoc behind the scenes. Warlock shows up and has all of these misadventures trying to stop him and rid the world of evil, essentially. There's a ton of like biblical analogies and very clear like homage and symbols and uses. This is a really interesting run. After that, we transition basically over to the Jim Starlin era for Warlock. This is when we see much more of what we know of Warlock when we read things like Infinity Gauntlet and more contemporary comics. Jim Starlin basically reimagines the character again. He's out of Counter-Earth now and he's set loose into the cosmos. He's trying to figure out who he is outside of everything he made for himself on Counter-Earth, who he is, what his purpose is, what the extent of his powers are, things like that. This also feels very Cosmic Marvel-y. I know I've read some of Jim Starlin's Silver Surfer run, and I can definitely see the kind of bones and foundations of some of that Cosmic Marvel in the pages here. This Warlock volume also introduces characters for the first time into the Marvel Universe, like Pip the Troll and Gamora, to name a few. Very exciting stuff. Recurring villain in this comic as well is Thanos, the Mad Titan, who we all know from different things like the Infinity Gauntlet, Starlin's run, of course the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and so much more. At any rate, I would say those are really the 3 distinct eras in this collection. We have the early Silver Age stuff with Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. We have the early solo stuff predominantly under Roy Thomas on Counter-Earth with the High Evolutionary. And we have that kind of 3rd era with Jim Starlin and the more cosmic Marvel aspects of this character. So we certainly get a sense of variety in this book. I will say it's only 4 issues of that early Silver Age stuff, and then up to about halfway through the book is all of those early adventures on Counter-Earth. We have a kind of crossover or features with the Hulk for a little bit, and then we transition over into Jim Starlin's era, which finish out the rest of that Warlock title, as well as some crossovers with things like Avengers and the Hulk again, and a bunch of other books. Very, very fun stuff. I will say, for my personal preference, I think the back half of this omnibus is certainly a lot stronger, especially under Jim Starlin. Starlin's run has, I think, a lot more energy. It's a lot more relatable and easier to grasp in many ways, and it feels like just like science fiction fantasy fun. Like I said, if you enjoyed Starlin's run on Silver Surfer, I think that you will certainly enjoy his run on Warlock. But I do think because we have all the transition in this character on this omnibus, the quality level is a bit variable. Personally, I really loved the Silver Age stuff, and I adored the Starlin era. I think the stuff with Roy Thomas was fun and interesting, but it didn't really grab me as much. I think that some of the supporting cast during that early run on Warlock were kind of bland and uninteresting. You know, he teamed up with some local like teenagers. Versus once we get to Starlin, you know, you have a troll, you have Thanos, you have Gamora, you have all of these different characters that I think were a much more fascinating group of people. We also have like some really great artwork from Starlin depicting all of these different alien races and all of these planets and things like that. Really just an enjoyable run. I think the fact that we get all of this in one hardcover edition is a really big selling point for me. I love the fact that we get to know so much like comprehensive knowledge about Warlock, all of his early adventures in this one book. I also want to admit, I didn't know a ton about Adam Warlock before reading this omnibus. I knew what I knew of him from Infinity Gauntlet and some of those Infinity stories, as well as when he appeared in things like Silver Surfer, and I was just vaguely aware of him in general, just knowing the Marvel Universe, but I hadn't read any of his solo stuff, and I know I was really excited because they released this omnibus. I know at the time of the recording, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is coming out soon, and I believe he features in that, and I was just excited to learn more about the character, and I think now that I've finished this, I am really compelled. Again, the second half of this volume I did think was much stronger. I found myself being able to read it a lot faster once I got to that second half because I was much more gripped and attached to the characters and the stories they were telling. I do think that the Starlin era feels in many ways more modern than some of the stuff we found at the first half of the omnibus, and that's to this book's credit. I do think that it was interesting though, even though it changed hands so many times, we had so many different creators across like a decade or so of writing, there was still kind of a narrative through line that traced the history of this character, and I did like that. I think that they paid attention to continuity, which I felt like was pretty important for this character, even as they evolved him, and generally let the character mature and change and become more nuanced. A very interesting piece of Marvel history. I think if you're a fan of Cosmic Marvel in general, this is a really good pickup. Transitioning a moment over to the artwork in this book, we have a lot of artists attached as we make our way through. Again, some notables I mentioned earlier are, of course, Jack Kirby, the man himself. We have Gil Kane, and then Jim Starlin, which Starlin was probably not only my favorite writer, but also artist for this title. I think because it was such a science fiction-y title, I think Starlin's artwork, with all the grotesque and interesting-looking aliens and the kind of features and technology and planets, I think Starlin just has such a commanding grasp of it. Like I said, I was already a fan of some of the stuff I've seen Starlin do in the past, so seeing him do Warlock just made a lot of sense to me. Like I said, it felt very similar to Silver Surfer in many ways as far as just the approach and the kind of tone of it, and I really liked that. I think the character design, also the kind of golden skin and kind of the red coloring and that green soul gem, just really interesting and striking. I think that the colors really popped off the page, even from the beginning with the Silver Age books all the way through the end. Very, very good piece of work here. I will say it reads like an older omnibus for the most part. It's not modern issues, with the caveat of Starlin's issues feeling a lot more contemporary. He even experiments with some of the paneling and the layouts. It's not just like your standard grid patterns. Even his first issue has some really interesting kind of framing around some of the paneling. Really inventive and fun. Really, really added a fresh breath of life into this character, and I really liked that. I think that another cool thing for art fans, and you'll see this in a few minutes, we are given a ton of extras in this collection. So we have so many sketches and different pieces of artwork from various stages of creation. We even have a kind of sketched lost issue that explores kind of just the art process throughout the development of these comics. Thought that was really eye-opening and fun. You'll see that in a little bit though, but overall I did feel like even as it changed hands, and again the issues span over a decade in this one volume, I do think that the art was always consistently strong. I really enjoyed it. Overall, really had that kind of classic comic book feel. And that was just really enjoyable for me. I always enjoy kind of seeing more classic looking books, and this is really some of the earliest Bronze Age stuff I've read. I think one of the other books I'm reading right now, the Luke Cage Omnibus, is my only other comic from Marvel that spans into the 70s for the most part, and so it's really interesting to see them evolve out of the Silver Age. I certainly still see a lot that borrows from that, but I'm really starting to see a lot more of Bronze Age artwork, and I see some of the differences, and I like that. I know I've read a lot of 60s books and a lot of 80s books, so reading things from the 70s, it's interesting to see how things kind of are right in the middle in many ways, but I think that that's a really big kind of fun part of being a comic book fan, especially if you like books throughout like the history of comic books. You can see how art styles generally evolve through different eras of comic book history, and so to have another book from the Bronze Age to study and look at, it was just a real treat, and I really liked seeing all the different alien worlds and technologies and characters. Very, very fun for me. I will say for the most part, I have gone light on story spoilers as there are so many different individual stories within this omnibus. There is still that feeling like each issue is its own story, at least for the first half of this book, or at least every couple issues. By the end, there is much more of a through line, and we go from one misadventure through the other, but there is still kind of that episodic feeling. And why that's cool is that there might be stories that hit more for some people than others, but you get such a selection of stories within this book that there's hopefully something for just about everyone. Some notable stories I do want to touch on that I thought were novel or interesting is of course the origin of Adam Warlock, who is first called Him when he emerges from his cocoon in those issues of Fantastic Four. Once again we have Alicia Masters kind of becoming a prominent role in sort of humanizing sort of these larger than life characters. I know she's done that for the Silver Surfer, and she does it again for him in the pages of Fantastic Four. I did think that that was a lot of fun, that story. It's a classic Silver Age story. I think it was really well, preserved and reprinted for this collection, and generally a great way to kick off the book. I know another storyline I thought was interesting, although I do think it maybe dragged for too long, was all the stuff on Counter-Earth, that stuff under Roy Thomas and some of the other creators. I think the High Evolutionary was a really interesting character that I wish we got more from in this volume. He certainly appears, but it's more of his presence is kind of around versus we get to see more exploration of the character. They do revisit him towards the end of the book as well, kind of bookending him in this omnibus, but he was certainly a fascinating character. I also think the Man-Beast was kind of a fun villain in just a straight evil presence. There was no kind of gray or middle ground. He was just a bad creature, and so just having Warlock trying to stop him felt very just good versus evil. I know I'm a Christian myself, so I saw a lot of really clear sort of Jesus pictures in this initial Warlock run, which was certainly interesting. I mean, I liked that this hero was trying to save the people and sort of willing to sacrifice for the people to rid the world of this evil presence. I did think that that was enjoyable overall. I just do think that the storylines went for a bit longer than they needed to, and I do think that the secondary characters we were given through much of that early run were a little lackluster. It's like a group of teenagers that the first issue I thought were kind of interesting, but then they just became kind of increasingly more bland feeling, I felt like. I think the heroes and the villains were kind of interesting. The whole conceit of the world and the creator and the High Evolutionary was interesting, but I think the rest of the characters kind of fell flat for me. I do think that's why it was such a just refreshing breath of air once I got about halfway through this book and it came under Jim Starlin's control. He completely revamped the character and the feel of this book to resemble much more of what we know of cosmic Marvel. I like that we kind of have Warlock out of Counter-Earth, out of the Earth, just unleashed in space basically, and trying to find himself. Like, what do you do after you've been this saving force for an entire planet, after you've had kind of a weird history? What do you do when you're just let loose in the universe to figure out what your purpose is and your role is now at this scale? And he also really amped up the significance of the soul gem, which is kind of this vampiric gem that steals souls. We know, if you're a fan of Infinity Gauntlet or the MCU, that this Infinity Stone is one of the Infinity Gems or stones, depending on if you're using the movie or comics as reference, but they're part of those gems that eventually make up the Infinity Gauntlet and all the powers. So seeing kind of the early introduction to some of those elements I thought was really fascinating. I loved all the stories in here with Thanos. I thought, again, as a fan of Infinity Gauntlet, I love seeing the beginnings of Thanos trying to again impress death and trying to now find these stones and the source of this power to kind of create this cosmic genocide. What a horrific villain with an interesting set of motivations, trying to do it for love in like the most twisted way possible. I think introducing Gamora in this volume was also a big hit for me. I love that character in Guardians of the Galaxy, so to see her in her early appearances here was definitely interesting. Pip the Troll added a ton of just comedy and levity to this otherwise kind of philosophical and tense comic book, and I think that Starlin just handles this so deftly. He really makes it so palatable and interesting. It's fun, but like kind of just maybe thought-provoking at the same time. And I think that all of the stories that had to do with those cast of characters were just so easily readable. I just blew through them. Another really interesting character that appears at the first part of Jim Starlin's era on the Warlock book is the character of the Magus. He's basically the dark counterpart of Adam Warlock. We find out in the early issues kind of what his relationship is to our titular character. I won't spoil that here, but he's sort of like the anti-Warlock in many ways, and he has just a commanding grasp of the galaxy at the time Warlock is unleashed from Counter-Earth into the cosmos. So one of his first missions under Jim Starlin is trying to stop the Magus. Really just great storytelling here, and the whole book kind of caps with a sequence of sort of Avengers related issues. We go into some Things spin-offs and stuff like that, but it was a great kind of cavalcade of fun Marvel heroes teaming up with Adam Warlock to kind of deal with these cosmic Thanos level threats, and I thought it was a really great way to cap the collection. Overall, really pleased with most of the stories in this book, especially once we crested that halfway point and we entered into that Jim Starlin cosmic era. And as you can see now, we're entering the back portion of the book. The remaining portion is all extras in this omnibus, and it's a really generous, healthy percentage of extras, which I loved to see. We got all of those early appearances of Warlock, and now we're just set loose into all of these artistic sketches and different developmental like photos and reproductions. We have like kind of essays or promotional things about Warlock. We even have a section that goes through a lost issue that was, I think it said in a note, it was like left on a taxi or something, and they never actually produced this issue, but it showed a glimpse at sort of some characters they might have introduced and some story elements they might have done that they ended up going another way. But I thought that was fascinating that we got some of these sort of lost issue panels and ideas. I think for comic historians or fans, this kind of material will be invaluable. I know for me, even as more of a casual fan, I thought it was fascinating. I loved flipping through all of that. We have some cover reproductions, some collection reproductions. There's some written work here. Again, the extras just span so much toward the back of this book, and I really enjoyed that. I think that there was a ton of rich detail, and getting an omnibus collection, I think having extras is such a great selling point that really differentiate it from a lot of the other different editions you can sometimes find for collections like these. To have kind of an all-inclusive volume with special features like this, just a really, really added bonus. And I think the special features we get with Warlock are definitely some of the most prominent I've read in a recent omnibus. Even now you can see all of these different cover reproductions. They reproduce some of the art from different like maybe trade paperback collections they've released for Warlock in the past, things like that. I always love seeing art like this. I think it's so cool that they just try to include as much as they can, really spare no expense with stuff like that for collections like this. Very cool to see, especially when some collections can be more sparse. Well done, Marvel. Ton of great extras on this bad boy. And that's going to bring us to the end of the collection, and now all that's left is to give the Adam Warlock Omnibus a grade. For a fascinating and comprehensive look at some of the early cosmic Marvel universe, the Comic Book Report is happy to give the Adam Warlock Omnibus from Marvel Comics a B. This collection was a ton of fun, but I think because of all the changing of hands with creators, the quality of the content was pretty variable. I will say the second half of this volume receives about an A from me. I do think the quality of that Starlin era did buoy some of the maybe less quality work in the first half of this omnibus that I found. Not that there weren't some real gems there in the Roy Thomas stuff, and I really did love the Stan and Jack stuff in the Silver Age, but overall, not as gripping as what we see later on in that Starlin run, at least in my opinion. Still a ton to love, and the fact that this edition had so many extras really made this something to look out for. So let me know if you're picking up or have read these Adam Warlock issues in the comments, and thank you so much for watching. This has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Maybe watch one of my other videos, and until next time, have a good one.